Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus again in reply spoke to the chief priests and the elders of the people in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon the guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent out other servants, saying, 'Tell those invited, behold, I have prepared my banquet. My calves and fatted cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to the feast.' Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then the king said to his servants, 'The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out therefore into the main roads and invite to the feast whomever you find.' And the servants went out into the streets and gathered all they had found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man who was not dressed in a wedding garment. And he said to him, 'My friend, how is it that you have come here without a wedding garment?' But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind his hands and feet, cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The Gospel of the Lord.
This parable about the king throwing the great wedding feast is following a series of parables, of kingdom parables. And again, here, this king, who is also a father, who has a dear son, he is just displaying so much extravagance in throwing this wedding feast where everyone is invited. It seems that cost isn't even an issue, and everyone should be treated in a special and splendid way. That's his desire. And so you see the generosity of the Father coming through in grace and mercy. And yet there are people who reject this offer. And not only do they reject the offer, they don't do it politely. They actually reject him in violence. It's a kind of a way of saying, "I will not serve." Does this remind you of someone? A guy whose name begins with L. Lucifer, who in a violent way rejects the invitation to be present at the wedding of the Lamb, the plan of salvation that the Father has disclosed. And he just completely nullifies all the gifts that the Father desires to give. And his troops with him doing violence to the faithful and doing violence even to the son of the king. And yet, at the same time, you see God responding in mercy. First, he has to deal justly with those who have done violence to the kingdom. So there's some kind of justice, and it's described very vividly. But you could say that we're in the context of a parable, and so in line with the way he's telling the story, he's saying that really the king is responding in a way that brings justice and also in a way that will do the right thing to take care of this group that is hurting all those who are to be invited. And you see, however, his mercy persists in this guy who shows up not properly clothed. And you can almost feel that this guy must be someone who perhaps survived the retribution, the judgment, and somehow he survived that. He managed to stick around. And the father's response to him is very interesting. He begins by calling him friend. It's an outreach of mercy. My friend. The improper closing is reminiscent of someone who didn't want to repent, didn't want to change and adjust his reception of the call of the Father to be included in this great wedding banquet. His clothing indicate a hardness of heart and an unwillingness to be clothed with the garments of the king. Imagine that. The garments of the king, which in some way are offered and yet not taken, to be included in the family even after perhaps a betrayal, but they're not accepted. And we're told he is reduced to silence. It's the silence of shame, not a shame imposed by the Father because he's already extended an offer of mercy. It's a shame that's self-imposed. It's a shame of being so entrenched in a rebellion that I will not serve. Does this sound familiar? I will not serve. It's the credo of Lucifer. I will not serve. And I have nothing to say. I have no response because my mind is made up and I see all the far-reaching consequences and I remain fixed in how I am just the same. I have nothing to say to you. And so his silence is his choice. His choice, not the choice of the Father. His choice to be excluded from the wedding, so he is excluded from the wedding feast. And then the wedding feast begins for those who desire to stay. It's a very sobering way and a vivid depiction of the need for all of us to make a choice and stand by it. Are we going to be in the wedding feast or are we not? And you can see in this parable that there's no in-between. There's no middle ground. You're either going to wear the white garment or you're not. And it's entirely up to you. And yet you have a gracious Father who's willing to be very, very flexible in accepting you at the wedding. But the white garment reveals that part of the family bears responsibilities with the acceptance of the invitation.
Regina Celi, letare